Welcome to UnstuckAF, a podcast here to help you do you better. There's a path that starts where you are, passes through who you are, and leads where you want to go. We're here to hear from people who've walked that path or who are walking it right now. This is Orlando Bishop, Coach Orlando, and I thank you for listening as we learn how to get unstuck, how to be unstuck, how to live unstuck. Unstuck as fuck. All right, so we have a very special friend to be having on UnstuckAF, because when I was figuring out what UnstuckAF might even possibly be, and what it would look like, what the art would be like, Linda McLachlan was there and coaching me and asking me some really insightful questions. It's my turn to ask the questions this time, but she knows that she got a special place in my heart now. She's the Linda. All other Lindas need some sort of modifier. You might be Linda from here or there, but she's the Linda. I've already informed her of that from now on. So there you go. So how are you? Say hi to the folks.
I'm great. I'm feeling blessed to be in your presence and to be on the hot seat this time. And thank you very much for asking me to join you today. So hey, everybody.
Absolutely. So we always start with a straightforward, though not necessarily easy questions, but I'll ask, when and or how did you know that telling our stories was going to play a big role in your life?
Wow. I guess I really got the bug to be an actor, which is all about telling stories in a way, when I was quite young. I certainly wasn't a child star by any means, but I got involved in community theater and went to, drama camps and those kinds of things as a relatively young person. And so that certainly introduced me to storytelling of a sort. And then as I, got more serious about it and trained as an actor. So I always was interested in stories and certainly interested in great storytellers. More recently, I think I was taken by sharing other people's stories, and I suppose in the end, in my own. During the pandemic, when who didn't start a podcast?
Right.
So I was very interested in trying to find a way of communicating stories of courage, which I found were really important to me. And as I kind of went through a period in my life, a difficult period in my life, and so sharing other people's stories and listening to other people's stories was really important. And I think it was just the inspiration that I found from hearing other people tell their stories.
Of course. Yeah. And so there's a lot there. And obviously from the time you were young, were there any actors or any particular stories that grabbed you? Like, can you point to a place where, that might be where I caught the bug, or, in terms of the acting piece?
I'm a classically trained actor, so I gotta say Shakespeare was and is one of the great storytellers, even though it's impenetrable as a teenager. We do such a disservice to Shakespeare by forcing teenagers to try and read. It's like, what is this? Yeah. And so I had a wonderful teacher when I was at theater school, Neil Freeman, who brought Shakespeare to life in a way that I had never experienced before, and was introduced to the kind of original texts. And so it was the folio, as it's called.
Mhm.
So I was really taken with that,
Mhm.
taking it kind of beyond that. As a young person, I certainly read a lot, and I think series of stories, Little House on the Prairie, or something like that. I grew up in
Mhm.
Canada, on the prairies. So Little House on the Prairie, while it was an American tale, it was very kind of close to my heart.
Mm.
My family come from farming backgrounds, so there was a lot to sort of take in there, but it really brought me into a world. And I think some of the great storytellers really, you lose yourself in them, whether it's a movie, whether it's a great song, whether it's
Mm.
any art form. I think when you can suspend your disbelief and get really pulled into it. I mean, look at what happened with Lord of the Rings or Star
Mhm.
Wars, that
Mhm.
became this franchise. And it comes down to great storytelling, the hero's journey. So anyway, that was a
Yeah.
lot.
No. Well, I mean, hey, no, it wasn't. No, and that's exactly what I was curious about. I mean, honestly, was I asking you, but for your call to action moment, right? So I get that in terms of the storytelling of it. So obviously, again, we met in pod, part of Akimbo, the podcasting workshop, and as you were, I'm sure there's a lot in between, but what do you think drew you to that piece, and what about what you learned in terms of Shakespeare and storytelling and sort of truly embodying these things? What did that bring to the podcasting world for you, or what did you see in the podcasting opportunity?
Well, there were two things going on, I guess. One was I need something to do. Another was uh, I was already starting or re-embarking on a journey
Mm.
that I had started in my late teens to become a professional actor. And I was still dipping my toe in the idea of going after that again
Mm-hmm.
now,
Mm-hmm.
a few years later.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so I wanted to work with a microphone and learn how to do the audio and edit and
Mm-hmm.
those wonderful skills that are applicable to being an actor. And I people said they liked my voice, and so I thought, well, okay, maybe I can do voiceover work.
Mm.
And so I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do with a podcast or what exactly it would be about. And many students begin that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was one in a long line of students who start out with not really a clue what they wanted to do. But I was interested in interviewing people and
Mm-hmm.
trying to figure that out. So, and I was less interested in telling my story and doing a host on mic or me writing
Mm-hmm.
a script and just talking. I was really interested in talking to people. And I had gone through coach training, and so I sort of thought, well, maybe there's something there that I
Right.
will try and find clients, or da da da.
Mm-hmm.
But I was really much more in the end interested in sharing sharing those stories of everyday courage.
Mm-hmm.
And my podcast is called The Arena: Living a Courageous Life. And I invite people who are not necessarily very famous or famous at all. I mean, they're just
Right.
quite um, under the radar, if you will,
Right.
and to bring those stories forward, and really finding a variety of stories, a really diverse group of folks that I've tried to handpick and bring forward. And yeah, so I'm not sure if that answers the question.
No, you're fine. So when you started doing the interview, that's all right. No, it was great. So you started doing interviews, did courage present itself, sort of emerge, and then you ran with it? Or in your figuring out what this was going to be and so on, did you find that and then identify people in your sphere who had those kinds of stories to share?
Again, going back to I didn't really know where I was going with the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And then as I began to share nuggets around my own story of having blown up my life and made some radical changes, and people in my network or people who would meet me would say, well, that's an amazing story. You're so courageous. I can't believe you did that. And I sort of thought, okay, well, maybe there's something there that seems to be of interest. And certainly I was inspired by other people's courage. And so I thought, well, okay, let's try and figure out something around that. And that's kind of where that came from. People overcoming circumstances in their life or choosing to make some kind of major change in their life in some way. So
yeah. Now, it's the obvious question from there as an interviewer for you to say, it blew up my life, made these radical changes. I met you past explosion, right? I met you on the other side of all that. So this is the only version of Linda I know. Can you share some of the story of the before and or the explosion piece?
Sure. Well, part of it was as I said, I started as an actor and then left being an actor and moved over to being an arts administrator, sort of on the other side of the desk, if you will, thinking that would be a reasonable facsimile of being in the arts. And did that for 15 years, did a whole bunch of different things, really amazing things. And then I thought, okay, I think I could make more money doing this. Like, are these transferable skills? Because I kept sort of hitting a ceiling income-wise. And I was introduced to a gentleman through my neighbor. Literally, my neighbor leaned over the fence and said, "What are you doing after the film festival?" I was like, "I don't know. I'm just trying to get through." Anyway, he introduced me to this gentleman, and I worked with him for 11 years and helped grow a business from he and I to about 50 employees when I left.
Wow.
And so that was all great. Like, on paper, it was awesome. It was, I made, good money, and I became a part of the ownership team. And there was a lot of wonderful things about the business, including my business partners. But I wasn't okay. By the time I blew my life up, I was very unhappy. And there was sort of a series of events, three deaths that happened, including my father.
Oh, wow.
And it didn't all happen at once. It just kind of began to build up over time. And I was, like many people, self-medicating with alcohol and dealing with stress. And I celebrated with alcohol. I consoled myself with alcohol. I did all that sort of thing. And I learned how to do that in theater school, to be honest. I mean, I didn't really drink before then, but it was like, let's go out and celebrate. Let's go out and, console ourselves. So, this kind of built up over time, and it just all kind of culminated in a few events that happened within the business that really didn't align with my values. And I was really struggling. I had been struggling for a long time. I tried to leave the business twice before I finally left.
Okay.
And got convinced, but also felt it's like, no, I need to give this another chance, and I need to do this, and what am I
Right.
doing, and it's the
Right.
right thing to do, etc., etc. So in the end, I kind of reached a breaking point again in terms of my involvement with the business, and I got a Facebook notification, or a Facebook ad that popped up, which was about a meditation and yoga retreat. And I was like, oh my God, I've always wanted to do that. It was the long weekend, Labor Day long weekend, and which is always for me just kind of a trigger of change, having been in school for so many years. It's that kind of like renewal, new paper, new pencil case, new crayons, that kind of thing.
Yep.
And so I went on this retreat, and with a question in my heart, which was, what am I going to do? And I sat down on my meditation cushion, and with that question, and basically within the first day, it was like, I have to go.
You have to go.
That's it.
Yeah.
And I knew that there were a lot more of those kinds of things, including my relationship, that needed to and were going to change. But I was kind of only ready for the first thing. But it was like an oak moving. It was,
right.
You just felt psychically the sort of the rocking and the roots were lifting. And so I left the business amicably. I ultimately left my relationship. I changed cities. I changed careers. I gave up alcohol and lost 80 pounds. So it was a pretty remarkable transformation. I was just listening to your last guest, who was like 168 pounds, and it's like, oh man, that is unreal.
Yeah.
That's like, I truly know what that's about, man.
Well, you just rattled off sort of like, oh, I changed this, I changed that. I mean, those were not, small things.
No.
I mean, like each one of those could be an episode or more. I guess I'm curious about when you sat down on you sit down on this pillow and you say, okay, what am I going to do? How did you know what led you to that being the question? And then once that was the answer, did it point to anything else? Like a lot of times, as I think of things in terms of who you are, where you want to go. And I guess I'm wondering which of those, or were, obviously where you are is where you are, but were the who you are and the where you want to go both out of line? Did you feel like, no, this made sense as a path, it just wasn't the right path for me? What was sort of underneath or behind that understanding that it's time to get out of the business?
I don't know that it was all that sophisticated. I mean, in the end, I had already been exploring with one of the business partners kind of what a departure would look like. But I continued to wrestle with the should I, shouldn't I? And I didn't have a clear idea of what the next step was going to look like. I felt like I needed to take the first step, and then clarity would come. And I've described it as, taking a step and that the stone lifts to meet my foot, as opposed to seeing the stone there before me, but I really just believing that what needs to happen next will happen next. And ultimately, there was a certain amount of how long of a transition would there be from the business to me departing, and what would all of that look like. So there were still many pieces to put together, but thinking that you're going to have a full plan is really like waiting to get it to do something until you've got all the pieces together.
Yes.
Ain't going to happen. I'm going to tell you that right now.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't have children. I wasn't married. Like there was a lot of circumstances in my life that
Hmm.
other people don't have. They have a house, they
Sure.
have a this or that. So some of those things were easier to
Yeah.
extract or pull apart or
And, and it's interesting, even when the whole plan is laid out, I think it's really important to understand that it's a proposed route to where you're going, right?
100%.
And
Yeah.
you'll run into detours, you'll run. So, whether you sort of put those steps there to have some understanding, or yeah, I think that flexibility is so important. Now, you've mentioned your your time in theater school, and that sounded very familiar. Of we drink to celebrate, we drink to console, we drink to definitely sounds familiar. And I think we talked at some point that I was a bartender, and I
Mm.
remember that the guy who was the bar owner. I think there's a little bit of me being a bit of a mascot, like all these grizzled guys and this Yale student. Hey guys, so I think they like that. And I remember him saying to me, "This business is never dull because exactly what you said. People come in when they're happy and people come in when they're sad. So they're old, but what they always do is come in. And that has stuck with me over the years, and sort of the truth of that. I guess with that said, and understanding that that's a time in life when we might be doing such things, it sounds like it sounds like the celebration and or the consolation got out of hand. Was that something that played into your decision to move on from the other thing, or did it not get out of hand and you just decided I'm making a new move and that's part of it? How did that play
You
out?
mean specifically in terms of alcohol or
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, specifically that piece.
Um yeah, I would say that alcohol uh, had control of me as opposed to me having control of alcohol. The
Hmm.
part of that that's the big lie is that it's designed that way.
Hmm.
It's designed to, I mean, it is a carcinogen, right? It's a
Mm.
legalized carcinogen. So it is meant to, over time, take over. And
Mm.
so there is a yeah, it's challenging because so many people that I talk to when they're like, so how did you decide? And they sort of sidle up to you and
Hmm.
ask you that question. Um, it's like, when did you know? Like, how much is too much?
Hmm.
And if you're asking yourself those questions, you're probably already there.
Mm.
Um, if you're doing dry January and sober October and whatever else they are,
Right.
um, on an annual basis, or always sort of feeling like, my thing was like I did dry January and then like burned down February. It's like to make up for lost time sort of
Right,
thing.
right, right.
And
We're free.
yeah, and so yeah, there's a belief that you have to be down and out, lost everything,
Right.
running your car into a tree
Hmm.
before it's really a problem.
Mm.
And there's lots of nuances well before that.
Yeah.
And I meet more and more people who don't have to get to that point before they say, okay, like enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's becoming easier, I think, to embrace that. So in my case, yeah, I was waking up too many times in the middle of the night, and my partner had tried to wake me and finally just went to bed, left me on the sofa,
Mm.
or um, really waking up well before, or waking up with a horrific hangover, or on weekdays,
Right,
um,
right.
and or starting to have a beverage maybe before the end of the school day, kind of thing.
Hmm.
That those kinds of things that just were happening a little too often.
Yeah.
and really finding myself, coming home and, immediately going to the fridge or going to the wine cellar or going wherever to just,
Hmm.
this was the way to deal with stuff. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
No, I gotcha. I it's interesting. Well, I'll share it this way. You'll let me know if it's interesting. No, but I remember I was in therapy at one point. There's a couple blocks of therapy ago, and I remember saying, okay, so when the depression's gone, what takes its place?
Yeah.
Right. And I just remember like in a kind of practical way, just going like, all right, like we're moving this thing out. Like, is it just gonna be a vacuum? Like, and that's something I've thought more about my asking that question over the years than I have necessarily about the answer to it, because I'm not sure that it's fully answerable. But I guess I'm wondering, in your experience of saying, okay, I'm removing alcohol from my life, or I'm changing my relationship with alcohol, was there was there a sense of like, oh, but now I walk in the door and what do I do? Or did you feel like, no, you just sort of, when you were able to sort of move into a different way of existing in your world? Was there a sense of loss around it? I guess is a question I have.
There's there still is, to a degree. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I'll go with a friend to a bar, or they'll sit next to me, and I can smell the
Mm-hmm.
rum, or I can smell the, whatever it is. And there is a
Mm-hmm.
sense of, or, a nice full bodied glass of red.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean, it's still triggering, but not enough
Mm-hmm.
to do anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
So I've and not everybody, believes in, oh well, if you're no longer drinking, then near beers are an option. For me
Mm-hmm.
they are.
Mm-hmm.
There's enough of a, and they taste much better than they used to. Um they actually taste like something, as opposed to, oh god, what is that?
What is that? Yeah.
Yeah. Um so I will drink a near beer, just so I can have a frosty
Mm-hmm.
glass and a drink in the summertime. But it's not like, oh great, let's have a dozen. Right? You're just like, okay, one's
Mm-hmm.
fine.
And then you're good,
Um,
right?
yeah, and more and more bartenders or bars will have, if you ask for a cocktail, you'll, get some sort of fancy cocktail. So that is kind of just the fitting in piece. But
Mm-hmm.
walking through the door and saying, I don't run to the fridge and say, okay, I'm going to have a near beer. Uh, a friend of mine who is a recovering alcoholic said to me, what happens is that dependency gets replaced with something else. And so, as addicts or alcoholics or what have you, somebody who's
Mm-hmm.
dealing with trauma, and you are trying to self-medicate through, by using alcohol, it's like having five garbage cans and four lids. You're constantly still
Mm-hmm.
trying to manage that feeling and that
Mm-hmm.
lack
Mm-hmm.
through something.
Yeah.
So I definitely uh, go through sort of, I don't say manic, but certainly working too much, or
Mm-hmm.
kind of just
Mm-hmm.
doing sort of things obsessively.
Got you.
And certainly the sugar, like in the
Oh, really?
last year, has just been like, oh god, now I got to deal with sugar. So because you haven't really dealt with what the underlying
Right.
issue is,
Right.
so you still have that need to soothe
Yeah.
and satisfy and
Mm-hmm.
punish and, whatever
Mm-hmm.
through something. So
Gotcha.
some people do it with exercise. Some people, oh God, I wish I did it with exercise. People do it with work, as I say, or
Yeah.
any other of those kinds of cleaning, or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it just an awareness around, okay, what's this behavior? And yeah, I could feel myself needing to be soothed.
Right.
And the problem is your brain turns off around that mechanical eating or that mechanical whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
or just jamming your schedule full so that you don't have time to think.
Stop. That's right. Yeah.
You don't have
Yep.
time to feel, you don't have time to think. And so, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, that definitely resonates with me. And coming out of the holiday specifically, um, end of the year, pretty exhausted, like wiped out, exhausted. And it was fascinating to me that recuperating over the holidays and getting some rest, it wasn't all fun. And
Mm.
it sort of like there was room to, there'd been enough going on that I had to put out fires that I didn't really have to stop and deal with each of the things that piled up. And then suddenly over those 2 weeks, it was like, yeah, no, now there's time. And so it's happening. So I definitely hear you on that. So you pack your life to the point where you can't manage that. It feels like so much of that is around control. The way you're
What do you mean?
describing it, my right. Yeah, I used to do it. I used to do a joke on stage where I said my therapist, I asked me, if I thought that maybe I was controlling, and I said, well, we've only got 15 minutes left, and I don't think we have time to discuss that. So but yeah, I mean, so much is like, and I can eat it if I want, I can drink it if I want, I can, how much of this time in this process has allowed you to think about control and to work on control, or is it, no, this is what I'm doing now, is I've sort of like, I found a healthier or healthy way to express the desire to sort of like control the surroundings and have control, or is there more letting go that's happened as you're leaning into this new phase?
I think there's still lots of work to do.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think I'm just in a process of replacing one thing with another. I don't think, the great Canadian psychiatrist Dr. Gabor Mate, who talks about trauma, what's the trauma, and where's the pain, right? And so whatever it is that you're doing, whether you're trying to control everything and pin everything down and control other people's lives or control your environment or whatever it is, or eating chocolate to feel better, which is a dangerous thing with self-care, that sometimes we can kid ourselves that what we're using for self-care is actually a coping mechanism and hiding the trauma.
Yeah. So for you, as you're going through your story, the losing of the 80 pounds, for example, is this you finding ways to be looking at the trauma for yourself, or how do these pieces that you described fit together? Like I said, I mean, you described it as dramatic changes, and they really were. I mean, to be in a relationship, to the weight, how do those pieces come together in terms of your facing of the trauma, or was it just these changes allowed you to sort of step back and that's to come?
I think it's a story that's unfinished, and it was a self-created dramatic series of events that I mean, I describe it as it's easier to lose the weight than it is to keep it off. It's the maintenance and the full addressing of an injury or a trauma that you can work really hard to get back on the field. But if you're still kind of not, if you think that you've arrived,
right.
If you think it's an event and then everything is done, then you're in for some surprises along the way.
Yeah.
Because you've got to quit alcohol every day. You've got to be vigilant around weight loss, and I'm having some relapse in that area because of the sugar and because of the you've got to be conscious and make decisions every day to continue to be on the track that you're on. Or you'll get drawn back into the business, you'll get drawn back into the relationship, you'll get drawn back into the friendships and social network that kept you in the world of alcohol.
Right.
You'll get drawn back into all of those things. You'll go backward. So the forward motion story is like it was on that first day sitting on the meditation cushion, where every day you've got to make a decision that takes you toward your future.
When you mention that future, it's interesting that's where that pointed, because I was going to ask that next. You talk about being on that track. I guess I'm curious where that track leads. You talked about moving back into acting. Yeah, for you at this point, with the changes you've made and moving forward, where does this track lead, do you think?
For me, the most important thing is that I'm living creatively every day. Whether that is writing from a simple journal entry through to working on a self-tape and submitting it, or recording some voiceover, or taking a class that helps me to keep my skills sharp. I want to think as an artist. I want to work as an artist as much as I can, and really immerse myself in as many ways as I can in pursuing it. So.
And I'm curious, how does that serve you? I mean, as you say it's obviously something you're doing intentionally. How is that serving you in terms of the track and the not going back to some of those other things? Or just like when you write each day or you're creating each day, what are you getting out of that's helping serve you on this journey, or fuel you maybe on this journey?
A really deep need to express myself, perhaps others, certainly others' work. So it's to take all of the things that I was good at in the context of the business and apply that in a creative context. So I was always the person who kind of pointed out the elephant in the room, or the dead bodies, or whatever it was. So using the intuition and insight that I had, and using that as a creative person, and I have a way with words, or
Yeah.
these kinds of things that people have told me for my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
They like my voice.
Mm-hmm.
So using that,
Yeah.
it's if it's a gift, then, and I'm on the other side of the great bell curve of life,
Mm-hmm.
uh, so I have more years behind me than I have ahead of me.
Yeah.
And so why the hell not?
Yeah. Yeah.
And as I said, I'm in moments I feel blessed by not having children and those kinds of things, because it gives me the flexibility to be able to make the decisions I
Right.
have made.
Right.
Life and those decisions would have been very different and more difficult, for sure.
If you had other people depending on you, sure, 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 sure. And I guess what stories have stood out for you? It sounds like I'm inspired by the ways in which you've decided to dig into your story, and we've talked about that, and we want to talk about it a little more. But I'm curious, what are the stories that have spoken to you? It seems like listening, in terms of your podcast, which I've listened to, I told you, I was like, I'll believe pretty much anything that voice said. That's pretty so that's pretty impressive. But yeah, what stories were grabbing you, or speaking to you, that allowed you to say, wait a minute, I think this is the area where I need to settle in and pay attention.
uh there's such a variety, but I think certainly stories of people who have overcome
Mm-hmm.
things that are out of their control and how they go about it.
Mm-hmm.
I was just listening to Viola Davis's
Mm-hmm.
memoir,
Mm-hmm.
and it was definitely one where I was like, okay, I have to listen to this. She's got such a fantastic voice.
Yeah.
And she does such an amazing job sharing her story. And I think, hers as an example, count the ways
Right.
that she has overcome, that she has risen up and taken herself by the hand and come into herself, embraced all of those facets of her experience, of her many experiences, and just bloomed into this most incredible woman, incredible role model, and such an inspiring actor, and an inspiring person.
Right.
And so I just, listening to those stories, I wonder how I would possibly live through what she had and be able to keep going.
Yeah.
And she talks about a few moments where you literally, it's almost a crack in the wall that you're the only one who can see it. And is it kind of a moment with that liminal space between life and death where you feel you've been pushed so far and you are at your limit, and then suddenly there's that little crack and you make that decision. David Goggins kind of talks
Mm,
in terms of, the moment when he stood in front of the mirror
right.
and sort of called himself forth.
Hmm. I haven't seen him talk about that, so I have to go hunt that down. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's in his book,
Okay.
and he was working as an exterminator, and was tremendously overweight, and
Mm-hmm.
he basically went and stood in front of the mirror and just basically said, like, this is it, this is the end. We are not doing this one more damn day.
Mm-hmm.
Said it with a little more colorful language.
I bet.
But
I bet. knowing a little bit about him, I would bet.
yeah. But again, another person whose book I read and listened to, and really had a huge impact on me. And it was after I had made lots of the major changes. But it is that kind of, what is that moment? What is that moment on the meditation cushion in my case, when you suddenly say, that's it. And I did feel very strongly
Mm-hmm.
that it was almost a spiritual experience where you just feel so alone,
Mm-hmm.
and your heart, your whole being is crying out for a sign, an answer to this question. If you put it powerfully enough, I'm not don't consider myself religious, certainly spiritual,
Right.
but is it God?
Right.
Is it the higher power? Whatever it is.
Yeah. I talk in Unstuck as Fuck, my stage show. I talk about just a moment I had with, it's no spoilers, but I do talk about a moment I had where the question that came to me, and I've shared this publicly before, was, do you have the courage to let go of who you thought you were going to be so that you can become who you're becoming? And I feel like, though it's not said nearly as concisely, as succinctly as your question on the cushion, it feels like there was a lot of that there, right? I mean, you were this person in this business, in this relationship with a certain physique, right? All those things, and you said, I'm needing to let that go. Um, Oftentimes people will ask, what advice, if you could go back and talk to that person sitting on that pillow, what advice would you give them? I have a slightly different question, which is, if you could get to watch the journey you've taken from that pillow to this moment, what's the most exciting piece of the story for you? What would you be like, wait till this part?
Mm. Hmm. I don't know if there was any, like, super exciting from other people's perspective
Mm-hmm.
moments, because there is no Pulitzer Prize, there isn't an Academy Award
Mm-hmm.
to share, um or becoming a Navy SEAL or
Right,
Ranger,
right,
or whatever.
right.
But um I guess one of the key moments was a year after quitting alcohol.
Mm,
And yeah, I think that there's the 30 days, there's 60 days, 6 months, but I guess a
Mm-hmm.
year later to be able to look back
Mm-hmm.
and think about how much had changed. And a year later, we
Mm-hmm.
were in the pandemic.
Hmm.
And I was so glad
Mm.
that because alcohol sales went through the roof and
Right.
suddenly you were able
Right.
to order
So,
beer with your wings or your whatever and have it to go, which
mm-hmm.
changed radically in Canada. And people were drinking. People were either taking the opportunity and completely going sober because
Mm-hmm.
suddenly they didn't have the same kind of pressures, and other
Mm-hmm.
people just kind of went the other way, which was like they
Yeah.
drank a lot more,
Yeah.
or at least for a while. So for me, it's like, wow, I'm really glad.
Yeah. Yeah.
Really glad I'm not grappling with that right now.
Right. That at that point. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would think that would have been an even more challenging, as you're pointing out, space in which it was just such a high stress. And I say was, I think of it as the lockdown. Yeah, I think those have kind
Yeah.
of become like interchangeable terms.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but one of the thoughts I've had about this whole, 3 years, as I said to someone, it's really something when if you would list the worst 5 years of your life, three of them are the last 3 years. And that's
They
true.
weren't for
That's
me, actually, but
yeah, no. I was just saying, like for me, that was like my experience. I was sort of like, wow, this is crazy. But I'm wondering, we've all gone through a trauma collectively. Like earlier, we were
mhm.
talking about trauma, and we each have had our traumas of one sort or another. I guess I'm wondering, what do you see in our story? Let's say even in as people are coming back out and it's like, well, we're getting back to normal life, but we haven't really gotten back to normal life. Nobody really seems to be addressing the fact that like a thing really did happen. like I sort of feel like everybody's like, oh, should we go back to the office or not? I'm like, go back to the office. Like we need to just across the globe, around the globe, just train therapists. Like that's the number one priority. Yeah, I'm curious where you see us in our story of dealing collectively with this yeah, I would say trauma.
I would say we're deeply in denial.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed.
um, yeah, I am seeing a desire to go back to a sort of normal, but there's no going back.
Mm-hmm.
It's like any sort of
Right.
hearkening back to the good old days, the bad old days of insert whatever,
Right.
and trying to reclaim some semblance of not to hearken back to MAGA or anything, but it's
Mm-hmm.
What generation are you wanting to
Mm-hmm.
make great again? Was it the
Mm-hmm.
1950s when you had no rights, or
Mm-hmm.
when this went on or that went on? Like you kind of go, what memory do you have of history, or what society was actually like?
About right.
So yeah, I don't think that. I think our state of mind is pretty fragile, and yet, like I say, sort of clawing at wanting things to be different. And Mother Nature is pissed. So she sent us a message and got us to all sit down in our corners for 2 years.
Right.
With the pandemic, here's an illness that you could all get and all die from. So here's lesson number 1. And if you weren't listening through all of that, I'm now going to bring fire and brimstone down on your heads, because in the form of storms and unprecedented. We haven't put
Yeah.
away the word unprecedented yet, right?
Right.
Because it's the snowstorms, it's the rainstorms, it's the hurricanes, it's the, whatever. She's ramping it all up,
Mm-hmm.
and we're still busy trying to ignore it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so our pretending, again,
Mm-hmm.
it's the 5 garbage cans and 4 lids
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing of and then there's the financial crisis and this.
Right.
So it's not all bad, but it could be so much better
Yeah.
if we were willing to not spend all of our energy on, we want it to be back like when it was when.
Right. And isn't that, you know, different brands of loss? Even in this conversation, you referenced, 3 deaths that sort of, as you were heading into your time to make a change and started, like I lost a very close friend, my cousin, in January of 2020, and sort of was nowhere near having dealt with that, and then came lockdown, and so that and I've had some losses lately, and I have learned enough, having lost my parents and so on, that one of the keys, it's gonna hurt. It's gonna hurt. It's gonna hurt. That's just is how it's gonna be. But that finding the new way things are, and sort of moving into that as opposed to the reaching back is truly, I have found, truly a part of it. Going from pain to suffering, to get a little new agey, right? Like, pain is inevitable, but we choose the suffering. It feels to me like that reaching back, whether it's us, and for a while I would pick up the phone as if I was going to call my mother, and it was like, oh no, you're a doctor. Like, wow. And but the more I could say, no, that is a fact, and if you want to sort of speak into the sky and think whatever you think, that's fine, but it's a new day. That helped me in the process. And I wonder if some of America's traumas specifically, but even more broadly in the world, if part of why they persist is our insistence, but we didn't want it to be that way, or we don't want to see it that way, right? And I'm wondering, yeah, if you have any reaction to that. And I did have another question, I guess, but yeah, just, it feels like that settling into the new situation and as what is so key in this process.
We just really hate change. I mean, it's so frightening.
Mm-hmm.
Human beings, we were designed to be driven by fear and protect ourselves through fear, but the whole fear of change gravitating towards certainty, that kind of whole dynamic is one of the reasons I think it's so hard for us to move forward when something happens. It's like, but we always used to do Christmas this way, or we always used to, or Mama used to always make this, or Uncle Bob, or whatever. And it's like, okay, but that's not there anymore.
That's over. Yep.
It's a new. So it's the clamoring for what was, and yet also, yeah, but Uncle Bob was also drunk all the time, or whatever. It's the kind of revisioning what was as well. Is it like, yeah, it was great in some areas, and it was also not so great in others.
Yeah.
And I lost our grandmother. My family lost our grandmother in February last year, and that was really hard. But I was so glad that she finally went. Well, because she wasn't the person that I wanted to remember. There was
Mm.
so much of her that wasn't kind of there anymore, you know, and
Yeah.
it was letting go of the physical vessel
Mm.
that she filled, and I really wanted to hang on to the memories that I have of her, as opposed to watching her deteriorate and be sad a lot of the time, or, you know,
Yeah.
uncomfortable or
Mm.
confused, or, you know, whatever.
Right. That distance between being alive and living.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Um, so in some way, wanting her to hang on because I'm not ready to let go of her,
That's right.
you know, it was hard, and
Mm-hmm.
it is hard, but it's harder for me to think like, God,
Mm.
had she gone 3 years before, I would have been not happy, but
Mm-hmm.
I would have been okay.
Mm-hmm.
It would have been okay if she went earlier, in my mind. But anyway,
This is maybe an unorthodox question, but it's an unorthodox podcast, so let's see what happens.
there you
But
go.
what's a memory of her pre struggle, pre decline, that when you think of like, that's my grandmother, that's what I'm gonna carry on from here, not the 3 years that maybe I could have done without.
And it's funny because I'm hearkening back, right? I mean, I'm
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing exactly what I was speaking about, which is remembering. And I wrote this story about a month ago or 2 months ago, which was remembering when we used to do sleigh rides. She would organize this, and my mom's immediate family, her brothers and sisters and their kids, would all get together, and we would do this sleigh ride, and you know, the classic Clydesdales with the bells and
Oh wow.
this, you know, the big sleigh and stuff, and there was these bales of hay on the sled, and uh you know, we would all be completely bundled up or whatever, and there'd be 2 or 3 feet of snow, and you'd hear the big Clydesdales coming down the country road and come into my grandparents' farm, and into the driveway, and they would, you know, just be thundering, right? I mean, you just hear the weight of these beautiful horses, and come through the driveway, and circle around, and we would all run out, and Jimmy was his name, who was driving the sleigh, and Grandma would climb up, and she'd sit on a bale of hay right next to Jimmy, and she would just sit and watch, and she would laugh because as kids we would get pushed off the sleigh and we'd fall, and Jimmy would, you know, wait until we were almost caught up with the sleigh, and then he would, you know, push the horses ahead, and, you know, they would take off, and you'd be like, you'd either fall in your face, or you'd, you know, miss the sleigh or whatever, or somebody else would push you and you'd have to keep running. And so they were just these amazing memories. And I remember she would just sit and laugh, and you know, sort of giggle, and, you know, shake her shoulders, because she would, you know, you know. So just a lot of different kinds of memories of her teaching me how to make her brownie recipe, or
Right.
these sorts of things, and playing cards with her, and just different things, that different times in my life that she was present, and, you know, the garden, and all the many things that she
Brought in.
that she passed on to all of us.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's really lovely. And I guess maybe as a final question, you know, we've talked about, you know, the looking back, the looking forward, the changes you've made.
Mm-hmm.
As you look, if this were page one, you know, chapter one of the next in the Linda series, what do you envision in terms of the story you're telling, the change you're making, whether for yourself or for others? What's the story you'd like to be telling through your 2023 and beyond, really?
I think we pick up the story and it continues on and deepens, evolves just in relation to having a creative life, hopefully a creative career that that I wish to explore, and being more self-sustaining, I guess, through that. So yeah, just using my many different sort of creative outlets and figuring out which ones will allow me to create a life.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
Well, I thank you so much. It was a great conversation. I liked deciding. We didn't know where it was gonna go. We'll see where it was gonna go. And
Yeah.
I don't think we could have picked this, but I really love how it unfolded. And I just think the world of you. I can't wait to read your book. I know that's coming. I'm very excited. And yeah, great, really, really great having this chance to talk to you and learn a little bit more about you myself.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Orlando. It's been a real privilege to have this conversation, and you've made me think about some things that I'm going to have to continue to think about for a while. So that's always great.
I love that. Big hug. We'll talk soon.
So, all right. Take care.
Bye-bye. All right, y'all. Y'all know what time it is. It's time to walk the line. I keep thinking about that conversation with Linda and how she described that visual of taking the next step and the stone rising to meet her foot. And I was thinking about how often we can't see the path and we allow that to stop us, and we just can't do that. So I don't know where you need to take a step today, this week, this month, this year, but that's our walk the line. I'm gonna take mine. I got this podcast episode out. It took a little bit of lifting, but I wanted to get back on track and on schedule with y'all. What step will you take to make that difference, to move forward, even if you can't see the destination as clearly as you might like? All right, I'm inviting you to come through realign.alignp.com. Check us out, having conversations. We're going to be having our conference the 20th to the 22nd, so I want folks to come through, see what we're doing. We're going to be working together in community, defining the line to get to the places we want to go. Check us out on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. Where you are, we are. So come say hello. All right now. And as always, we gon' get unstuck. We gon' be unstuck. We gon' live unstuck. Unstuck